running this committee meeting on behalf of the chair of the committee, Bill Starr, because he's not going to be able to join us, and he asked me to run the meeting in his absence. So let's go around and take a few introductions, please. We'll start at this end.
Mike Chadwick, Internal Audit.
Weddleton Assembly.
Azal Park, MOAIT.
Mike Abbott, City Manager.
L.B. Gray Jackson.
New training.
Robert Ayers, CFO.
Jim Stevenson.
Amy DeBoski.
Julia Tucker, Assembly Council.
Rose Foley, Assembly Vice Chair.
Thank you. And for those who don't know, the Municipal Audit Committee is the only committee that's required by municipal code. And one of the requirements for this committee is to selectively review management action taken to implement audit recommendations contained in all reports of audits. And so this particular audit, both the chair and I and Mr. Bosky felt that we needed further review, and that's the purpose of this meeting today. With that said, Mr. Chadwick, you have the floor.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
This was a report that we released in the middle of May. This is an annual report. We do a P-card review every year. And the good thing is we don't find fur coats and diamond rings being bought. I think that is primarily because municipal employees know they expect us to come around every year to do this audit.
Let me quickly recognize that Mr. Fink has joined us.
Apologize for being late.
So let me just, let's turn to page 2. That's our first finding. And here we found that there were ineffective controls regarding municipal cellular telephone usage and the corresponding bill payments made with P cards. And the IT department took this finding seriously and has taken numerous steps to address the things that we found in this finding.
And Zoe, if you would like to comment after Mr. Chadwick makes his presentation, please feel free to just let me know and I'll call him. Thank you. Mr. Trainee.
Mike, did you say that somebody took a cell phone home that used as a hotspot, and their family went out there and ran up minutes and charges, using it as an internet hotspot?
That's what it appeared to be. That was fine. That was bullet number 3 at the top of page 3, where we exceeded the data plan by 52,694 megabytes, resulting in an additional monthly charge of $735. And it appeared that the employee had taken the cell phone home that was used as a hotspot for whoever wanted to access it. Yes.
So my question would be, how do we stop that from happening again?
Well, Mr. Trainee, through the chair, you couldn't stop it from happening. You can only take measures after the fact. Perhaps if you have somebody that wants to willingly violate policy and protocol, you could, because every cell phone nowadays has the ability to become a hotspot when you buy the packages. Now, we could look into packages and see if there's the option of not having that feature. I'm not sure really off the top of my head if that's possible or not. But the intent would be that, and that's what we're trying to put in place, is to educate folks on what the bills should be, educate folks on what the data plans are, and then have the directors and have the folks that are reviewing the phone bills on a monthly basis be alerted to when there's discrepancies and then deal with it. And if it's a personal charge, there is a protocol in place to have the employee reimburse the community for the personal component when it's identified.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Trainee. Mr. Myers.
Madam Chair, to the question brought by Mr. Trainee, just to sort of elaborate on the comments of Mr. Harrop, there actually is a way to stop people from even taking that action. And one of the things that the IT department has done, that Saul's working on right now, is an update to the cellular telephone policy. Because right now they're really not cellular telephones anymore. They're smartphones. They do things like hotspots. And in that draft that I've seen, the IT department has been proposing that the phones that are provided by the municipality are for business use only, and that's the way I think you really address that. Now, the incidental personal use, I think is something that we all recognize can happen, but, setting up a hotspot using 60 gigs of data, that seems like a bit over-excessive. So I think IT department, in addition to, from an update of its cellular technology policies, I think we'll be working on that, and we'll resolve that.
Thank you, Mr. Harris. Mr. Karat, do you think that it's reasonable that this employee reimburse the municipality for those overcharges? I'm just asking a question.
That's reasonable?
Do you think that it's reasonable to request that this employee reimburse the municipality for those overcharges?
I think that would be a conversation that director of that department have with the employee to validate that it is indeed non-business use. And then I think by policy, if one says that, and that's, I have sent an email message out to this effect, so going forward, the answer is yes. It is at the director's discretion to determine what portion of an overage is considered personal use, and then ask that employee to reimburse the muni. And that has been communicated in an email somewhere around the June 14th timeframe, making the directors responsible for this. But it's at their discretion, because they're the ones that have to decide what is business use.
All right. Okay, thank you. I just thought I'd ask the question, so thank you. Mr. Chapman, please continue.
Thank you. Finding two.
Excuse me one moment. Mr. Middleton, did you have a question?
That was my question.
Thank you.
Continuing on page 5, finding 2, we found that Amazon Prime memberships were sometimes purchased by individual P-card holders belonging to the same municipal departments and sometimes even the same offices. Finding 3, we found some questionable purchases, including clothing, GPS, and some furniture bought at an office. Finding 4 on page 6, we found that the payment net configurations, that they needed further improvement because they allowed P-card transactions to be reviewed and approved by a cardholder's subordinate. For example, you could be the director, but the secretary can review and approve the P-card transaction, which could sometimes put an employee who's a subordinate in an awkward position of approving a transaction, and they're told, well, I'm the director, you approve my transaction. And they've been working on this, but further work needs to be done. On finding 5, on the bottom of page 7, we found that sometimes the employee relations department did not inform the P-card administrator in purchasing when an employee is terminated, so that you could have P-cards that were still out there, but the employee was gone.
Mr. Trainee?
Now, don't we have a policy that we collect their P-cards as they leave the office on their last day?
Yes, we do have a policy.
Isn't it being followed?
Sometimes it's not being followed. Or what happens is that perhaps someone who's not here in City Hall, the department's not here, they collect the P card from the employee, but they never turn the P card in to purchasing. So the P card's still floating out there, and purchasing is not aware that that person is terminated because they weren't properly notified of the termination. So you really have 2 problems. One is the P card wasn't returned, and 2, which is on the next finding, that terminations, sometimes purchasing wasn't notified properly when an employee terminated their employment. So they may get a notice of termination a month after the employee left, and they go, well, I wish you would have told us when the employee terminated that they were leaving, so that we could make sure that it got returned.
And it's not actually even the possession of the card that makes a big difference. Many of these cards are used online, which is the appropriate way to use them. The key step needs to be deactivating the card. The possession of the card is actually not that critical.
It's just having the information of the card is problematic.
Yeah, but there's employees, it's not unusual for employees to correctly create online accounts with the credit card information already in. That makes perfect sense, and that's entirely appropriate in many cases. So the key step is for purchasing to be made aware upon termination, so that the cards can be deactivated immediately at that time, just like we do with their key access. We do a pretty good job with that. If you have electronic access to the facilities, we do a pretty good job of terminating that access as someone walks out the door for the last time. What we don't do as good a job of yet is on the P card. And even if we physically recover the card, it takes a while to deactivate it. And so it's sitting in the supervisor's desk drawer, but that isn't necessarily preventing it from being used, either appropriately or inappropriately. So that's one of the steps we have to work through. And that's a 21st century problem that didn't used to be around, and so we're taking steps to make sure that that information is immediately transmitted to purchasing so that cards can be deactivated.
Thank you, Mr. Abbott. Mr. Weddleton.
So it says here that this is a problem until SAP goes live, so SAP coordinates all this stuff when someone's terminated or paying the credit card?
I don't think that this narrow problem that I've just described is going to be addressed by SAP. This is a change in our protocols related to termination. There's a little checklist that goes down with termination. And right now it does say recover a P card if one has been issued. What it doesn't say is deactivate the P card. And that's what really needs to happen. And there's a very simple way to do that. You call the P card administrator in the purchasing department. You tell them, I've got John Doe's P card. Today's his last day. Turn it off. And it's a matter of a couple of keystrokes, and that happens. But that information has to be transmitted, and that's what doesn't always happen right now. So anyway, we're in the process of modifying that, and I think that'll smooth this out quite a bit.
Thank you, Mr. Abbott. Thank you, Mr. Weddleton. Mr. Steele.
Have we looked in terms of dollar amount? Have we identified fraud, or have we gone after monies that were inappropriately, fraudulently charged, I suspect? Or have we gone to the supervisors about overages, large bills?
Mr. Steele, through the chair, we did not identify any instances of fraud. They have the potential for fraud.
So it's time to change policy now, before something
Before something
picks up on it.
happens.
Yeah.
What?
Thank you, Mr. Steele. Mr. Fink.
To the chair, would it be possible for payroll to have the list of names? And so when they get the termination sheet, if they don't have the P card returned and they can verify that the employee has its P card, they can hold the check or do something like that?
What's possible?
Thank you, Mr. Fink. Mr. Bosky.
Thank you. I just want to go back to this. I'm trying to wrap my head around why somebody would think it's okay or how it'd be a municipal service to buy a skirt. Can you elaborate on that one for me?
That's on finding 3.
Yeah. That's the one that really caught my eye, because I'm trying to understand how, if Mr. Abbott goes and buys a skirt, why would that be appropriate?
It's a problem at a lot of levels.
Mr. Dombrowski, through the chair, we found that sometimes the municipal departments purchase clothing for their employees. There are some employees who, there's an issue whether or not non-reps are permitted to have clothing. There are union employees who have clothing. For like example, firemen or policemen, or sometimes other types of workers. But whether or not non-rep employees entitled to clothing has always been a sticking point. In this case, there was a non-rep employee who purchased the clothing as part of their uniform. And so we thought it was a questionable purchase.
Yeah, I would think it'd be a questionable purchase. I mean, I can understand a police officer, fireman, somebody who has a uniform that they're supposed to be wearing.
But there are non-reps that have uniform requirements as well. And Mike's right, this is in that gray area where some departments pay for that and take it on themselves and others don't. And it's not clear in the personnel rules what the employer's responsibility is regarding non-reps and
So,
uniforms.
Mr. Abbott, if I may ask you, if we're talking about a non-rep that has uniform requirements, we're not talking about shirt and a blue skirt. Is that what you're talking about, or?
Might be a police lieutenant. Could be a battalion chief. Non-rep, full uniform requirements, who pays? The code is not as clear as a contract is.
And was this employee in that situation where they had a uniform requirement?
Yeah, I don't remember which department this one is, and we've reviewed a lot of these cases over the years, and we do not have a consistently applied approach to the issue of non-reps and sort of clothing.
That seems to me like that would be right to try to clarify, because, I mean, I guarantee you put this out in the media and people would freak out. They would say, what in the world, why are we buying people's clothes at an upscale store? I mean, it just doesn't, the perception is one that's ripe for clarification, I think.
Yeah, and that's why, and these P-card reports, and I've reviewed a lot of them, not necessarily through the internal audit process, but just in the course of it. I saw one charge where we bought almost $1,000 worth of clothing on a P-card. Turns out it was to replace clothing lost as a result of a claim against the municipality. It was a water and sewer claim where a mistake or a problem with a AWU activity caused someone to lose $1,000 worth of clothing, and so the AWU staff person went and bought the stuff. They used their P card to do it. It was a perfectly valid charge, but it looked terrible on the receipt. You know, I see the stuff from all these clothing stores, and I wonder what the what. And there's a good story at the end of it, and so. This is an example of one where there's a reasonable story out there. The department it was a legitimate business purpose, but the P-card description and the receipt don't tell that whole story.
And the policy procedures
Yeah.
it's unclear.
It is unclear, and there is an effort to try to clarify that. Right now it's handled at the department level, but there is not a consistently applied approach between departments. I believe it is consistently applied within departments. The fire department knows who they pay for clothes for and who they don't, non-rep or otherwise. But is that the same as it is at AWU or at ML&P or Public Works? Probably not.
I would think it would make sense if you're talking specifically about non-reps to give them a uniform allowance as part of their pay, then you don't have this issue. I mean.
And that's one of the approaches that departments utilize. Other departments just pay, you get 2 uniforms a year and we buy them, and other departments don't pay a dime, but still expect their people to wear at least sort of logo wear, if not actual uniforms.
Thank you, Mr. Abbott, Mr. Boston, Mr. Trainee.
No, he's already, I just want to make sure we do the first part, so your manual will cover this.
Thank you, Mr. Trainee. Please continue, Mr. Chadwick.
Thank you. At the top of page 7, or top of page 10, finding 7, we have some P-card transactions not timely reviewed and approved. And these were P-card transactions in the pay maintenance system. It's a continual struggle to get department directors to review and approve the P-card transactions. Numerous reminders are sent out by the purchasing department saying, please review and approve your transactions, basically so we can close the book. And so we found that there were some transactions that just weren't approved. On page 8, and Mr. Abbott alluded to this a little bit about descriptions for P cards. Sometimes they're pretty vague and they're difficult to understand. For example, when we see a description that says S, I have no idea what S is supposed to mean. Or when we see a description that says Susie has tobacco, what does that mean?
It means
Susie
you got to go
has
talk to
tobacco.
Susie.
Yeah, talk to Susie.
I know what it means.
But it just makes it difficult when you're reviewing transactions to look at the P card, to look at those descriptions and know what was bought. Now, sometimes the description is accurate, but it's difficult to tell. For example, one time we looked at a description for AWU, and it said gun racks. Gun racks?
wrong with that?
What a big whistle with that. You know, so we went over to Avery, we said, why are you guys buying?
That was a steel gun rack or what?
What it was it was a gun rack that went in the back of a cab for a pickup truck, so they could hold maps. But if they would have been a little bit more clear that said gun wraps to hold maps or something, it would have been more helpful. So anyways, purchase descriptions are not always adequate. That's just an area where we can always do a little bit better in trying to describe what was bought instead of just putting S or ticket number 19.
I have one comment, okay? In my opinion, I think it's clear that descriptions need to be improved. Because to look at something, Susie has a backup, that's unacceptable. And if I was an auditor for municipalities financial, that wouldn't be acceptable. Thank you. Please
Thank
continue.
you.
You're welcome.
That's the end of this report. And 6 months later, we'll be doing another P-card report. But generally, the municipality is doing pretty well with their P-card purchases. There's always areas for improvement. And I believe Zal and the IT department is taking a significant step in addressing these cell phone charges. One of the things that they've done that I thought was very helpful that they're working on is putting together a little grid that helps explain what the cell phone plans are. Oh, there it is. Because if you're an admin assistant and you're reviewing a bill and you say, okay, they've got this data plan that costs $15. Is that right or wrong? I don't know. And so they put together this little chart that helps explain, here's the data plans, and this is what you should be looking for when you review the bills. They haven't had this before, so an admin assistant who's paying these bills and looking at them goes, well, I guess that's right. But now they have this, so I think these are some good steps to help get these smartphone or cell phone charges properly reviewed and under control. So thanks, Sal.
Thank you. Mr. Steele?
I would think that programs or projects like SAP would be right for a lot of errors on P cards. Are we using, I'm sure our employees are using P cards. Are there P cards for the project? How is that working?
Well, certainly employees that are working on the project may also have P cards, and if there were project expenses that were eligible, but there's not a lot of SAP related work that is purchasing, rope, soap, and dope sort of things that would be the typical P card style purchases.
I'm thinking ribbons and paper and.
Oh, yeah, to the extent that we're buying office supplies, then sure, that would be the case. And I know that some of the SAP project staff, the Muni employees, do have P cards, and I'm sure they're using them for that purposes. And when we were, it was before our time, but when we were renting apartments and furnishing them and things like that, I know they were using P cards for some of those transactions.
Mixed between employees and contractors sometimes we get.
We don't have contractors. We do not issue Muni P cards to our contractors. They may have their own P cards through their corporate entity, and that we may ultimately pay those. They may ultimately charge us for some of those purchases, but that we would not issue a Muni P card to a non-Muni employee. At least I believe that is a bright line inside our policy.
Thank you, Mr. Abbott. Thank you, Mr. Steele. Mr. Harris?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to follow up on one point with respect to item number 2 on page 5 about the Amazon Prime memberships, just to update the committee. Purchasing has had discussions with Amazon about having a citywide account, and Amazon has said, sure, that sounds like a great idea, but you're still going to end up with these individual Amazon Prime accounts down the road. So when Mr. Chadwick does this audit in 6 more months, it's very likely this funding will still be there next time, because Amazon is telling us that, yes, you can have a citywide account, but it's not going to cost you $90. It's going to be, you'll have one, and it'll have these different branches, and they'll all be $90 or whatever the price of Amazon Prime is. So we made
employees, so Amazon is not gonna have just one $99 account for the municipality of Anchorage, which makes sense, and I really appreciate you explaining that. Because when I saw that, I was really concerned. I would like, and I'm not to put you on the spot, Mr. Packrat, is that?
Parak.
Parak. That's why I call you Saul, because I
I like it.
your last name. Parak.
Zal,
Parak. Anyway, are there any other corrective measures that you may have taken that you would like to share with the committee?
So we're taking a couple of steps. So the first one was a message went out to all the directors, and in that the key messages were that they are by policy responsible for reviewing the P cards. That it is their responsibility and they are accountable for that review. So that message was sent out to them. We've gone through a reconciliation process with GCI when they took over the contract from ACS. There was a lot of billing errors and issues that made life complicated for the P card holders. The billing costs, etc., that would be reviewed. So that has all been resolved and credits calculated and applied. We have created this matrix to help the P card holders actually pay appropriately. And then we're in the process of actually doing an audit, which is connecting with all the directors that we are aware of that have cell phones that are paid for by the muni, and letting them know that this is our record, what we are aware of that they have bought and are paying for, validated and confirm that those cell phones are indeed still in use or not in use, because that is also a situation where we've got cell phones that are being paid for monthly but are not actually being used. And so that is a process, and that will likely happen every 6 months or so, once we get a baseline, which is what we've got underway right now. But those are the steps we're taking, at least as far as the cell phone requirements.
Thank you, I appreciate that. On a side note, I have a question. How do we deal with employees who have municipal equipment, iPads, computers, when they leave the municipality? Because I've heard some things. Yeah.
So, recovering the physical asset.
Yeah, that belongs to the municipality.
I don't have an answer for, because I do not actually know what individual directors and departments do in terms of when somebody walks out the door and what do they recover and who they give it to, so I don't really know the answer to that. But in terms of their security and access through those devices to our environment, that IT shuts off as soon as we're notified.
Thank you. Well, I'm going to ask you, Mr. Municipal Manager, Mr. Abbott, how do we deal with those types of situations?
Well, there's a clear and unequivocal expectation that all muni property be retained by the municipality, and if it's been assigned to an employee during their employment, when that employment is over, that equipment is recovered by their supervisor. And if it's IT gear, it goes back to IT. Sometimes it stays in the department environment and it's reassigned there. But there's no doubt that there's an expectation that that happens. And that if an employee cannot account for a piece of equipment, that they be charged for that appropriately. I too have heard of cases where that has not occurred, and those departments where there has been a concern expressed of that nature have been directed to take corrective action. So there's a process through the payroll system and other ways that we can recover costs for devices that have been assigned to folks, whether it's a cell phone or another IT device. We've had issues with other things as well. But I don't believe it's a systematic problem. I believe there are I'm not aware of more than a few of these examples. I think the departments take quite seriously the expectation that they recover all equipment from employees.
Thank you, Mr. Abbott. I really appreciate that. And I'm aware of just a few, but in my opinion, a few is too much. I really appreciate your comments on that subject matter. Any other comments from anyone? Nope. Any audience participation? There's nobody in the audience except for Rose, our staff. I just want to thank everybody for being here, and I really appreciate this process. And on Tuesday, David said we can now accept the audit and in the hopes that the next audit that we get